My husband and his family called me uneducated trash and screamed, "Get out, you lowlife." The next year, Melissa Turner would remember the exact words for the rest of her life. She was standing in the dining room of the Ashford family's large house, at what was supposed to be a quiet family dinner, when her husband's mother, Patricia Ashford, set down her wineglass with a sharp, deliberate click and finally said, out loud, what she had clearly been thinking for the past 4 years of Melissa's marriage to her son. "You're an uneducated piece of trash, and you always have been," Patricia said, her voice cold and clear enough that every person at the table heard it perfectly. "I don't know what my son ever saw in someone like you." Melissa's husband, Grant, sat silently beside his mother, not defending her, not even looking uncomfortable, simply staring down at his plate, as though the conversation had nothing to do with him at all. "Grant," Melissa said quietly, her voice shaking, "are you going to say something?" Grant finally looked up, and what Melissa saw in his eyes was not love, or even simple discomfort. It was something closer to embarrassment. Embarrassment about her, in front of his family. "She's not entirely wrong," he said quietly. "You never finished your degree, Melissa. You work a job that doesn't exactly match this family's standing. I've tried to explain that to my mother for years, but honestly, some of what she's saying isn't unfair." The room went silent for a long moment, the weight of Grant's betrayal settling over Melissa like something physical, crushing the air from her lungs. 4 years, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 years of marriage, and this is what you actually think of me. Patricia, seizing the opening Grant's silence had created, stood from the table, her expression triumphant and cruel. "I think it's time you understood your place in this family," Patricia said. Get out, you lowlife. You've never belonged here, not for one single day." Melissa looked around the table, at Grant's father, Harold, who said nothing, staring uncomfortably at his napkin, at Grant's sister, Deborah, who smirked slightly, clearly enjoying the scene, at Grant himself, who still would not meet her eyes. "Grant," Melissa said one final time, "are you actually going to let her talk to me like this, in front of everyone, and say nothing?" Grant was quiet for a long moment, and then, in the quietest, most cowardly way possible, he simply shrugged. "Maybe you should go stay somewhere else tonight," he said. "Let things cool down." Melissa stood up slowly, gathering what remained of her dignity, and walked out of that house without another word, understanding, with sudden and complete clarity, that the marriage she had believed in for 4 years had never truly protected her from the family that had clearly despised her from the very beginning. To understand the particular cruelty of Patricia's words, it helps to understand exactly what Melissa had actually built, quietly and without the Ashford family's knowledge, over the years of her marriage. Melissa had grown up in a working-class family, the daughter of a mechanic and a school cafeteria worker, in a small town 2 hours from the city where she now lived. She had, in fact, started college, a detail Grant conveniently left out during his cruel agreement with his mother, but had been forced to leave after 2 years when her father was seriously injured in a workplace accident, requiring her income to help support her family through his long recovery. She had never gone back to finish her degree, not because she lacked the intelligence or ambition, but because circumstances had simply never allowed it. Instead, she had built her own path, working her way up from an entry-level administrative position at a mid-sized logistics company to, by the time of that terrible dinner, a senior operations manager role that she had earned entirely through hard work, demonstrated competence, and years of quiet, determined effort. Grant knew all of this. He had known it since the early days of their relationship, when Melissa had shared her story openly and honestly with him, trusting him with the full context of her life, that he had chosen, at that dinner table, to reduce her entire journey down to never finished your degree, allowing his mother's cruel judgment to stand largely unchallenged, revealed something about his character that Melissa realized, standing in the driveway of the house she would never enter again, she had never fully allowed herself to see clearly before. Melissa spent that first night in a hotel room, unable to bring herself to return to the home she had shared with Grant, needing distance and quiet to process the full weight of what had just happened. She called her sister Angela, sometime after midnight, unable to hold the events of the evening inside herself any longer. "They called me trash," Melissa said, her voice breaking as she recounted the evening's events. And Grant just sat there and agreed with parts of it. 4 years, Angela. 4 years of marriage, and he let his mother scream at me like that, without saying a single word in my defense. "Oh, Mel," Angela said softly, her voice thick with anger and sympathy. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" Melissa was quiet for a long moment, staring at the hotel ceiling, feeling something shift inside her. Not just grief, though grief was certainly present, but something harder and more clarifying underneath it. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm finally going to stop trying to prove myself to people who decided, a long time ago, that I wasn't worth their respect. I think I'm done with all of it, Angela. Grant, his family, all of it." In the days that followed, Melissa made a series of careful, deliberate decisions, moving through her shock and grief with a clarity that surprised even herself. She contacted a divorce attorney, a sharp, experienced woman named Rebecca Choi, who had been recommended by a colleague at work. She began, quietly, gathering the financial and legal documentation she would need for the proceedings ahead, and she moved, temporarily, into Angela's spare bedroom, needing the support and stability of family, who had never once made her feel like she needed to prove her worth. Grant called several times during this period, his messages shifting from initial confusion to growing alarm, as Melissa's silence made clear she had no intention of simply cooling down and returning to the marriage, as though nothing significant had happened. "Melissa, please," he said in one particularly desperate voicemail. "I know that dinner got out of hand. I know I should have said something. Can we please talk about this properly, instead of you just disappearing?" Melissa listened to the message once, then deleted it without responding, understanding clearly that a proper conversation would have happened if Grant had genuinely wanted one, in the moment his mother was actively humiliating his wife at the dinner table, rather than days later, once the consequences of his silence had become uncomfortably real. As Melissa began the difficult work of untangling her life from Grant's, she found herself, for the first time in years, honestly reflecting on the full shape of their marriage, not just that single devastating dinner, but the pattern of smaller, quieter humiliations that had led up to it, ones she had, until now, worked hard to explain away or minimize. She remembered the family holidays where Patricia would make pointed comments about people who don't understand proper etiquette, always looking meaningfully at Melissa while saying it. She remembered Deborah's habit of introducing her to family friends as Grant's wife, rather than by her actual name, as though Melissa's identity existed only in relation to her husband. She remembered Grant himself, gently but consistently, over the years suggesting she consider finishing her education whenever she mentioned any professional achievement, as though her accomplishments would never fully count until validated by a credential his family found acceptable. "I think I convinced myself, for years, that these were just small things," she told Rebecca, her attorney, during one of their early meetings. "Small enough to overlook, small enough not to make a big deal about. I think I was wrong about that. I think they were never small at all. I think I just got very good at minimizing them, because the alternative, actually confronting what was happening, felt too overwhelming." "That's an incredibly common pattern," Rebecca said gently. "And recognizing it clearly now, even this late, is genuinely important. It's going to help you build a much stronger case for yourself going forward, both in this divorce and in your own understanding of what you deserve." The divorce proceedings, once formally initiated, moved forward with relative efficiency, given that Melissa and Grant had no children together and had kept their finances largely separate throughout the marriage, one of the few decisions Melissa had insisted on early in their relationship, a decision that now proved remarkably fortunate. Grant, through his own attorney, attempted several times to arrange a meeting to discuss reconciliation, clearly still not fully grasping the depth and finality of Melissa's decision. "He says he wants to properly apologize," Rebecca relayed to Melissa during one of their calls. "He's asking if you'd be willing to meet, just once, before finalizing everything." Melissa considered this for a long moment before responding. "I'll meet with him," she said finally. Not because I'm reconsidering anything, but because I think I deserve to say some things directly, rather than only through lawyers. I think that matters, for my own sense of closure. Melissa and Grant met at a quiet coffee shop, neutral ground chosen carefully by both parties, several weeks after that devastating dinner. Grant looked tired, visibly diminished in a way that might have moved Melissa deeply, in an earlier chapter of their relationship. Now, she simply observed it with a distant, careful clarity. "I know I failed you that night," Grant said, his voice unsteady. "I've thought about it constantly since then. I should have stood up for you immediately, the second my mother said those things. I don't know why I didn't. I think, honestly, I've spent our entire marriage avoiding conflict with my family, even when it meant letting them treat you unfairly. I let that pattern continue for way too long, and it cost me the thing that mattered most." "I appreciate you saying that," Melissa said evenly. "But I need you to understand something, Grant. This isn't really about that one dinner, even though that dinner was the moment everything finally became impossible to ignore. This is about 4 years of you allowing your family to treat me as less than I am, without ever once genuinely standing up for me, consistently, the way a real partner should have." "I know," Grant said quietly. "I know that now. I wish I'd understood it while there was still time to fix it." "I wish that too," Melissa said, and found to her own surprise that she genuinely meant it, not because she wanted to reconcile, but because some part of her still mourned the marriage she had once believed they were building together, even as she recognized clearly now how one-sided that belief had actually been. With the divorce finalized within a few months, Melissa began the process of rebuilding her life entirely on her own terms, moving into a small apartment of her own, focusing her energy increasingly on her career, and slowly reconnecting with parts of herself she felt she had quietly set aside during the years of trying to fit into a family that had never truly wanted her. At work, she threw herself into a major new project, leading a significant operational restructuring for her company's largest regional distribution center, a project that would, if successful, likely position her for a promotion to director level, a role she had quietly aspired toward for several years, but had never felt fully confident pursuing, while managing the emotional weight of her difficult marriage. "You've seemed different lately," her colleague and close friend Nadia observed one afternoon, watching Melissa work through a complex logistics problem with focused, confident determination. "More decisive somehow, more like yourself." "I think I finally am myself," Melissa said, smiling slightly, "for the first time in longer than I want to admit." 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Melissa's restructuring project proved remarkably successful, reducing operational costs at the distribution center by nearly 20% while simultaneously improving delivery times. A genuinely impressive achievement that caught the attention of the company's senior leadership. She was promoted to Director of Regional Operations, a significant advancement that came with substantially increased responsibility, a considerable salary increase, and a level of professional respect and recognition she had worked toward for years, entirely on her own merit. "I want you to know," her company's CEO told her during the announcement of her promotion, "that your work on this project has been genuinely exceptional. You have a rare combination of strategic thinking and practical hands-on competence that we don't see often. I have no doubt you'll continue to rise within this company." Melissa, standing in that boardroom, receiving recognition for exactly the kind of hard work and genuine competence that Patricia Ashford had so cruelly dismissed as insufficient, felt a quiet, powerful sense of vindication, not loud or dramatic, but deep and genuinely satisfying. Around this time, Melissa reconnected, somewhat unexpectedly, with an old college friend named Marcus Webb, whom she had lost touch with during the difficult years following her father's accident and her subsequent departure from her original college program. Marcus, now a successful entrepreneur, running his own consulting firm, had reached out after noticing Melissa's promotion announced on a professional networking site, curious to reconnect after so many years, and genuinely impressed by the career she had built. "I always knew you'd end up doing something impressive," Marcus told her, during their first dinner catching up after so many years apart. "Even back in college, before everything happened with your dad, You had this incredible drive and clarity about you. I'm not surprised at all, seeing where you've ended up. It's been a long road, Melissa admitted. Not always in the direction I originally planned. But I think, looking back, I'm actually proud of the path I ended up taking, even the difficult parts. Their reconnection gradually deepened into a genuine friendship, and eventually, over the following months, into something more. A slow, careful romance built on mutual respect and genuine admiration, entirely different from the dynamic that had characterized her marriage to Grant. Marcus, unlike Grant, never once made Melissa feel that her lack of a completed college degree diminished her value or her accomplishments. If anything, he seemed genuinely fascinated by the resilience and determination that had shaped her unconventional path to professional success. I think it's remarkable, he told her one evening, several months into their new relationship, that you built everything you have now without the traditional path most people assume is necessary. That takes a kind of intelligence and grit that a degree alone can't teach anyone. Not everyone sees it that way, Melissa said, thinking briefly of Patricia's cruel words at that fateful dinner. My ex-husband's family certainly didn't. Then his family was foolish, Marcus said simply. Genuinely, profoundly foolish to have someone as capable and determined as you in their family, and to treat that as something shameful, rather than something to be genuinely proud of. Melissa felt something warm and healing settle in her chest at his words, a stark contrast to the years of quiet diminishment she had endured within the Ashford family. Over the following year, Melissa's life transformed steadily and completely, built now entirely on her own terms, rather than in reaction to or accommodation of someone else's expectations. Her career continued its impressive trajectory, with her director-level success leading, within 18 months of her promotion, to an even more significant opportunity: recruitment by a competing logistics company, offering her a vice president position, overseeing operations across an entire multi-state region, along with a substantial increase in compensation and professional standing. Her relationship with Marcus deepened into genuine partnership, the two of them eventually moving in together, building a home life characterized by mutual respect, genuine admiration, and none of the quiet, corrosive judgment that had defined her previous marriage. I feel like myself again, she told Angela during one of their regular sister dinners, nearly a year after that terrible night at the Ashford family dinner table. Better than myself, actually. I think I've built something even stronger than what I had before, precisely because I finally stopped trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided, unfairly, not to see it. As Melissa's professional success grew increasingly notable, eventually earning her a feature profile in a respected regional business publication, discussing her impressive rise from an entry-level administrative role to a vice president position within a major logistics company, word of her achievements gradually made its way back to the Ashford family, through the small, interconnected social circles that inevitably link even estranged families and their communities. Grant, according to what Angela eventually heard through a mutual acquaintance, had struggled considerably in the year following the divorce, having lost, along with his marriage, a significant portion of his own professional confidence, apparently having leaned heavily on Melissa's steady, practical support throughout their marriage in ways he had never fully appreciated until she was no longer present to provide it. Patricia, meanwhile, according to the same secondhand accounts, had reacted to news of Melissa's impressive career trajectory with a mixture of disbelief and quiet, uncomfortable reassessment, apparently struggling to reconcile the uneducated trash she had so cruelly dismissed with the accomplished business executive now being profiled in respected publications. Melissa, hearing these secondhand accounts, felt surprisingly little satisfaction in Patricia's discomfort, not because she had forgiven the cruelty of that terrible dinner, but because she had, by this point, genuinely moved past needing the Ashford family's validation or reckoning to feel secure in her own worth. I used to think I'd feel triumphant hearing something like this, she told Marcus, after Angela shared the latest update. Now I think I mostly just feel distant from it, like it happened to a different version of me, one who needed people like that to see her value before she could fully believe in it herself. Nearly 14 months after that devastating dinner, Melissa found herself, by pure coincidence, at the same upscale restaurant where Patricia Ashford was hosting a business luncheon, the two women crossing paths unexpectedly near the restaurant's entrance. Patricia's face went through a complicated series of expressions upon recognizing Melissa: shock, then something like discomfort, and finally, an attempt at composed civility that Melissa found almost amusing, given the venomous cruelty Patricia had shown so openly just over a year earlier. "Melissa," Patricia said carefully, "I heard about your recent promotion. Vice president? Is that right? Quite an accomplishment." "It is," Melissa said evenly, neither seeking nor avoiding the interaction, simply meeting it with calm, settled confidence. "I've worked very hard for it." "I imagine you have," Patricia said, an uncomfortable pause following her words, clearly unsure how to navigate the reality of the successful, composed woman standing before her, so completely at odds with the uneducated trash she had once so confidently dismissed. "If there's nothing else," Melissa said after a moment, "I have a meeting to get to." She offered a polite, entirely unbothered nod and walked past Patricia into the restaurant, leaving the older woman standing, visibly unsettled, near the entrance. That evening, recounting the unexpected encounter to Marcus over dinner, Melissa found herself surprised by how little emotional weight the interaction had actually carried. "A year ago, running into her would have completely destroyed my whole evening," she admitted. "I would have replayed every word for days, wondering if I'd said the right thing, whether I'd shown enough strength, whether I'd somehow validated everything cruel she'd once said about me. Today, I just felt nothing, really. Like she'd become a small, distant part of a chapter of my life that's genuinely closed now." "That sounds like real healing," Marcus said, reaching for her hand across the table. "Not forced, not performative, genuine, settled peace." "I think it is," Melissa said, considering the truth of his observation. "I think somewhere over this past year, I stopped needing her, or Grant, or any of them, to acknowledge what I'm actually worth. I built that certainty myself, through my own work, my own choices, my own life. That feels like a much sturdier foundation than anything their approval could have ever provided." A few weeks after the chance encounter with Patricia, Melissa received an unexpected email from Grant, the first direct contact between them since finalizing their divorce over a year earlier. "Melissa, I hope this message finds you well. I heard about your recent success, and I wanted to reach out honestly to say how genuinely impressed I am, though I imagine my opinion likely means very little to you at this point, given everything that happened between us. I've spent the past year in a lot of difficult self-reflection, working with a therapist to understand why I allowed my family's cruelty toward you to go unchallenged for so long. I think I understand now, more clearly than I did at the time, how deeply that failure damaged not just our marriage, but you personally, in ways I'm genuinely sorry for. I'm not writing this hoping for reconciliation. I understand that ship has sailed, and honestly, I don't think I deserve a second chance, given how thoroughly I failed you when it mattered most. I just wanted you to know that I see, clearly now, the mistake I made, and I wanted to properly apologize, even this late, for the pain I caused by staying silent that night, and for the years of smaller silences that led up to it. I wish you continued happiness and success. You deserve it, more than I properly understood at the time. Grant. Melissa read the email several times, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions, some lingering sadness for the genuine love that had once existed between them, before it had been slowly eroded by years of unchallenged family cruelty, but also, unmistakably, a settled clarity about how completely she had moved beyond needing anything further from him. She considered not responding at all, but ultimately decided a brief, honest reply felt like the right way to properly close this final chapter of their shared history. Grant, thank you for your message, and for the honesty in it. I appreciate you taking the time for genuine self-reflection, and I hope that work continues to serve you well, whatever comes next in your life. I want you to know I've built a genuinely happy, fulfilling life since our divorce. One built entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who value me completely, without qualification. I don't say that to hurt you, but because I think it's important you understand that whatever damage that night caused, I've done the work to heal fully from it, and I'm in a good place now. I wish you well, Grant. I hope you find eventually the courage to stand firmly for whatever and whoever matters most to you, the way I needed you to stand for me, all those years ago. Melissa. The following spring, nearly 2 years after that devastating dinner at the Ashford family table, Marcus proposed to Melissa during a quiet, meaningful evening at the same small restaurant where they had first reconnected after so many years apart. I know you've been through something incredibly painful, Marcus said, kneeling beside their table as Melissa's hands flew to her mouth in surprised delight. I've watched you rebuild your entire life since then, with a strength and grace that continues to amaze me every single day. I don't want to be someone who simply appreciates the woman you've become. I want to build a genuine partnership with you, one where you never once have to wonder whether I'll stand fully behind you, no matter what challenges we face together. Melissa, tears of genuine joy streaming down her face, said yes without a moment's hesitation, understanding completely, in that beautiful moment, the profound difference between a partner who merely tolerated her and one who genuinely, completely championed her. Melissa and Marcus married the following autumn, in a warm, joyful ceremony attended by close family and friends who had supported Melissa throughout her remarkable journey of rebuilding, her sister Angela serving as maid of honor, her parents, deeply proud of the resilient, accomplished woman their daughter had become, and Marcus's own warm, welcoming family, who had embraced Melissa completely from the very first time they met her. During his wedding toast, Marcus spoke movingly about the qualities that had drawn him to Melissa, deliberately, pointedly honoring the very aspects of her journey that the Ashford family had once so cruelly dismissed. I fell in love with a woman who built an extraordinary career and an extraordinary life, entirely through her own determination and hard work, Marcus said, raising his glass toward his new wife. I fell in love with someone who faced genuine cruelty and chose, instead of bitterness, to build something even stronger and more beautiful in its place. I am endlessly proud to stand beside her today and every day going forward as her husband. Melissa, listening to these words, felt the last remaining shadow of that terrible dinner finally completely dissolve, replaced entirely by the warm, secure joy of building a genuine partnership with someone who valued her completely, without qualification or quiet judgment. 2 years into her marriage with Marcus, Melissa was promoted once more, this time to Chief Operations Officer of her company, a remarkable achievement that placed her among the most senior executive leadership of a major regional logistics firm, an accomplishment that would have seemed almost unimaginable to the young woman who had once left college early to support her injured father, uncertain whether her interrupted education would forever limit her professional prospects. She was invited that same year to speak at a regional business conference about her career journey, an opportunity she approached with genuine enthusiasm, recognizing the chance to share her story with other professionals who might be navigating similarly unconventional paths. I want to talk today, she began her keynote address, standing before several hundred attendees, about the myth that there's only one correct path to professional success. I left college early, not by choice, but by necessity, to support my family through a difficult time. For years, I let that fact make me feel less capable, less deserving of the professional respect and success I ultimately achieved. I want to tell you today that the winding, difficult path I took, one built on hands-on experience, relentless hard work, and genuine competence, rather than a traditional credential, led me to exactly where I needed to be. I hope if any of you are quietly carrying similar doubts about your own unconventional journeys, that my story offers some encouragement that your path, however different from the expected one, can still lead you somewhere remarkable. The speech received a standing ovation, and in the weeks that followed, Melissa received dozens of messages from professionals across various industries, thanking her for articulating a truth many of them had quietly carried but rarely heard spoken aloud with such clarity and confidence. In the years that followed, when people asked Melissa about the remarkable transformation her life had undergone since that devastating dinner at the Ashford family table, She never told the story purely as one of simple revenge or vindication. I think the real story, she would say, isn't really about proving Patricia Ashford wrong, though I suppose, in some practical sense, my career has done exactly that. The real story is about what happens when you finally stop needing people who have already decided not to value you to somehow change their minds. I spent years trying to earn respect from people who had made their judgment long before they ever really knew me. The moment I stopped needing that validation and started building my life entirely around my own sense of worth and my own genuine relationships, everything else, the career success, the healthy marriage, the real happiness, followed naturally. Do you ever think about forgiving them? People would sometimes ask, curious about the emotional resolution of such a painful family rupture. I think I've forgiven them, in the sense that I no longer carry active anger toward them, Melissa would say thoughtfully. But I don't think forgiveness requires reconciliation or even ongoing relationship. I've simply chosen to release the weight of what happened without needing them to acknowledge their cruelty or apologize properly or change in any meaningful way. That release was something I did entirely for myself, not for them. 5 years after that terrible dinner, Melissa and Marcus welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Grace, a name chosen deliberately, Melissa explained to Angela during a quiet conversation, to reflect the genuine grace and resilience that had carried her through the most difficult chapter of her adult life. I want her to grow up knowing, Melissa told Marcus, holding their newborn daughter in the quiet hospital room, that her worth was never determined by anyone else's cruel judgment. I want her to understand, from the very beginning, that the people who genuinely love her will show up for her, consistently and without hesitation, the way you've always shown up for me. And if she ever encounters people who don't, family or otherwise, I want her to have the strength to walk away from that cruelty and build something better, the way I ultimately did. Marcus, watching his wife hold their daughter with such profound tenderness and hard-won wisdom, felt an overwhelming surge of love and admiration for the remarkable woman she had become through everything she had faced. She's going to grow up surrounded by people who genuinely value her, he said softly, starting with the two of us and extending outward to everyone who's chosen to be part of our family's story. Years later, as Melissa reflected on the entire arc of her remarkable journey, from that devastating, humiliating dinner at the Ashford family table, through the painful process of rebuilding an entirely new life, to the genuine happiness and professional success she had ultimately achieved, she found herself grateful, in a complicated but genuine way, even for the pain that had set this entire transformation into motion. I don't think I would have found the courage to leave if that dinner hadn't happened exactly the way it did, she admitted to Angela one evening, years later, watching their own daughters play together in the backyard. I think, without that final, undeniable cruelty, I might have continued making small excuses for years longer, telling myself the smaller humiliations weren't significant enough to leave over. In a strange way, that terrible night gave me exactly the clarity I needed to finally choose myself. I'm just glad you found your way to where you are now, Angela said, squeezing her sister's hand warmly. Whatever painful path it took to get here. So am I, Melissa said, watching her daughter laugh joyfully in the golden evening light, surrounded by a family built entirely on genuine love and mutual respect. I think that's really the truest lesson of everything I've been through. Sometimes the people who call you trash are simply revealing, with perfect clarity, exactly who they are, not who you actually are. And once you understand that difference clearly enough, you find you have everything you need to build something far better than they ever imagined possible for you. 6 years after Melissa's daughter Grace was born, the little girl had grown into a bright, curious child with her mother's steady determination and her father's easy warmth. Melissa, now Chief Operations Officer at her company for several years, had settled into a comfortable rhythm balancing her demanding career with the deep, intentional presence she brought to raising Grace, determined always to give her daughter the kind of unconditional confidence in her own worth that Melissa herself had once had to fight so hard to build for herself as an adult. "Mommy, why don't we ever see Grandma Patricia?" Grace asked one afternoon, out of nowhere as they baked cookies together in the kitchen. She had, apparently, overheard a conversation between Melissa and Angela referencing the estranged Ashford family. Melissa paused, considering carefully how to answer honestly, without burdening her young daughter with more detail than necessary. Grandma Patricia and I had a very difficult disagreement a long time ago, before you were born, Melissa said gently. She said some very unkind things to me, and it hurt me very deeply. I decided, after that, it was healthier for me not to have her in my life anymore. That's not something you need to worry about, sweetheart. You have plenty of people who love you completely, exactly as you are. Grace considered this with the serious concentration young children sometimes bring to complicated ideas. Was she mean to you because you didn't finish college? She asked, having apparently absorbed more of the family story than Melissa had realized. She was mean to me for a lot of reasons that weren't really fair, Melissa said carefully. But yes, that was part of it. She thought that made me less important than other people. I want you to always remember, Grace, what someone learns in school is important, but it's never the only thing that determines a person's worth. Kindness, hard work, and treating people well matter just as much, if not more. That same year, word reached Melissa, through the same small, interconnected social circles that had carried news of her own success back to the Ashford family years earlier, that Patricia had been diagnosed with a serious illness, a slow-progressing but ultimately terminal condition that would, according to what Angela had heard, significantly limit Patricia's remaining years. Melissa received this news with a complicated mixture of emotions, surprising herself with the genuine sympathy she felt, even after everything that had happened between them. I don't wish suffering on anyone, she told Marcus that evening, processing the news carefully. Even someone who caused me as much pain as she did, I think I've healed enough at this point that hearing this doesn't reopen old wounds. It just feels sad, honestly, a reminder of how much time gets wasted on cruelty and pride when life is this fragile and this short. Do you think you'll reach out? Marcus asked gently. Melissa considered the question for a long moment. I don't know yet, she admitted. I don't think I owe her anything, but I also don't want to carry any regret later about not extending whatever grace I'm capable of, now that the stakes have changed so significantly. A few weeks later, Melissa received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, delivered to her office, which struck her immediately as unusual, given how little direct contact she'd had with anyone from the Ashford family in years. The letter was from Patricia. Melissa, I imagine this letter comes as a surprise, and I understand if you choose not to read further, or not to respond at all. I would understand completely. I've recently received difficult news about my health, and it has caused me to reflect, more honestly than I have in years, on choices I've made throughout my life that I'm not proud of. Chief among them is how I treated you during your marriage to my son, and especially how I behaved that final night at dinner. I want you to know, I've followed your career from a distance over the years, through mutual acquaintances, and I've watched you build something genuinely remarkable, entirely through your own effort and talent. I was wrong about you, Melissa. Completely and inexcusably wrong. I judged you based on assumptions I never bothered to examine honestly, and I said things to you that I deeply regret, especially now, facing my own mortality with much greater clarity about what actually matters. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not writing this hoping to reestablish any kind of relationship, unless that's something you might someday want. I simply felt I owed you an honest, direct apology, rather than allowing more time to pass without ever properly acknowledging the harm I caused. I wish you continued happiness, and I'm genuinely, deeply sorry. Patricia. Melissa read the letter several times, sitting quietly at her office desk, feeling a complicated wave of emotions she hadn't fully anticipated. She thought about that terrible dinner, now nearly 7 years in the past, the cruel words that had once devastated her now feeling distant, almost belonging to a different chapter of her life entirely. She thought about the years of rebuilding that had followed, the genuine happiness she had found with Marcus, the confident, secure life she had built for herself and now for Grace. She thought, too, about her own daughter's question just weeks earlier. Why don't we ever see Grandma Patricia? And the model of grace and forgiveness she hoped, someday, to demonstrate for Grace, even toward people who had once caused real harm. That evening, she discussed the letter carefully with Marcus, weighing the possibility of some kind of response. "I don't think I need to fully reconcile with her," Melissa said thoughtfully. "I don't think that would be healthy, or even necessary, for my own well-being. But I think, given her circumstances, and given the genuine sincerity in this letter, I might want to respond. Not to rebuild the relationship exactly, just to offer whatever closure might be possible for both of us." After careful consideration, Melissa wrote back a brief, honest letter that acknowledged Patricia's apology without promising more than Melissa genuinely felt prepared to offer. "Patricia, thank you for your letter and for the honesty in it. I'm sorry to hear about your health. I hope you're receiving good care and support during this difficult time. I want you to know that I've done a great deal of healing since that dinner, and I've built a genuinely happy, fulfilling life in the years since. I don't carry active anger toward you anymore, though I won't pretend the pain of that night didn't shape me significantly, in both difficult and ultimately positive ways. I appreciate your apology, and I accept it in the spirit it was offered. I don't think I'm ready for anything resembling a full relationship, and I hope you can understand and respect that, but I didn't want to leave your letter unanswered, especially given everything you're currently facing. I wish you as much peace and comfort as possible in the time ahead. Melissa." Over the following months, Melissa and Patricia exchanged a small handful of additional letters, careful and measured, neither woman pushing for more closeness than felt genuinely appropriate given their painful history, but both, gradually, finding a strange, unexpected comfort in the honest correspondence. Patricia shared, in one letter, details about her declining health that she admitted she hadn't even shared fully with Grant or Deborah, finding it somehow easier to be completely honest with the daughter-in-law she had once so cruelly wronged than with her own children, who she worried might not handle the difficult truth as steadily. Melissa, in turn, shared small, careful details about her own life, Grace's growing curiosity and kindness, Marcus's steady support, the genuine happiness she had built, not to rub her success in Patricia's face, but because she sensed, in Patricia's letters, a genuine desire to understand the fuller shape of the life Melissa had built, beyond the painful chapter Patricia had once been part of. "I find myself looking forward to her letters, in a strange way," Melissa admitted to Marcus one evening. "I never expected that. I think, somehow, this careful distance has allowed both of us to be more honest with each other than we ever managed when we were actually in each other's daily lives." During this period, Melissa learned, through Patricia's careful, honest letters, more about how Grant had fared in the years since their divorce. According to Patricia, Grant had struggled considerably, both personally and professionally, in the years immediately following the divorce, eventually entering therapy at his mother's gentle but persistent urging, working slowly through the patterns of conflict avoidance and family loyalty that had led him to fail Melissa so completely during their marriage. He had, more recently, according to Patricia's update, begun dating someone new, a woman named Christine, whom Patricia described as steady and kind, someone who I think Grant has finally learned to genuinely stand up for, having learned that lesson the hardest possible way. Melissa, reading this update, felt a quiet, genuine hope for Grant's growth, free now of any lingering personal investment in his choices, but still able to wish him well, given the shared history and genuine, if deeply flawed, love that had once existed between them. "I hope he's actually learned something," she told Marcus. "Not for my sake, for whoever he ends up building a life with next. Everyone deserves a partner who's actually willing to stand up for them." As Patricia's illness progressed, her letters to Melissa grew more reflective and philosophical, often touching on the broader lessons she felt she had learned too late in her life about pride, judgment, and the genuine cost of prioritizing appearances over authentic relationships. "I think," Patricia wrote in one particularly moving letter, "that I spent most of my life deeply afraid of anything that didn't fit neatly into the image I had constructed of what my family was supposed to look like. You threatened that image, not because there was anything actually wrong with you, but because you represented something I hadn't planned for, hadn't controlled, hadn't approved in advance. I understand now, facing the end of my life with much greater clarity, how much genuine love and connection I sacrificed on the altar of that rigid, foolish image. I hope, whatever time I have left, I can model something better for my grandchildren, including, I hope, the granddaughter I've never had the privilege of meeting." This letter, more than any before it, moved Melissa deeply, and after careful consideration and a long conversation with Marcus, she made a decision she hadn't fully anticipated making. Melissa decided, ultimately, to visit Patricia in person, not to fully reconcile, and not to bring Grace along, at least not yet, wanting to first assess the situation carefully before involving her daughter in such an emotionally complex reunion. The visit took place at Patricia's home, the same large house where that devastating dinner had once taken place, though the atmosphere now felt entirely different, quieter, more vulnerable, stripped of the cold formality that had once characterized every interaction Melissa had experienced within those walls. Patricia, visibly weakened by her illness, but alert and clearly moved by Melissa's presence, greeted her with genuine, uncomplicated warmth that stood in stark, almost unrecognizable contrast to the cruel woman who had once screamed at Melissa to leave. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said, her voice weaker than it had once been, but carrying genuine sincerity. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either, honestly," Melissa admitted, taking a seat beside Patricia's chair. "But your letters moved me. I wanted to see you while there was still time." They talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, working through, with more honesty and vulnerability than either woman had ever managed during Melissa's actual marriage to Grant, the full weight of what had happened and why. "I want you to understand something," Patricia said, at one point during their conversation. "I don't say this to excuse what I did, because nothing excuses it, but I think some of my cruelty toward you came from my own insecurity. I never finished my own education either, you know. I married young, into money, and spent my whole life afterward desperately trying to prove I belonged in the world I'd married into, by becoming even more rigid and judgmental than the people I was trying to impress. I think, somewhere along the way, I decided that judging you harshly would somehow make my own insecurities less visible. That was profoundly unfair to you, and I'm deeply sorry for it." Melissa listened carefully, feeling something settle and soften further within her at this unexpected vulnerability. "Thank you for telling me that," she said gently. "I think understanding the fuller picture helps, even now. It doesn't undo the pain, but it helps me understand it wasn't really about me at all, in the end. It was about whatever fear you were carrying long before I ever entered the picture." "That's exactly right," Patricia said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I'm so sorry it took me losing everything else to finally understand that clearly." Before leaving that day, Melissa made a decision that surprised even herself. She showed Patricia photos of Grace on her phone, sharing small details about her daughter's growing personality and interests. Patricia studied the photos with visible, aching tenderness. "She's beautiful," she said softly. "She has your eyes." "She asked about you recently, actually," Melissa admitted, "wondering why we don't see you. I wasn't sure what to tell her." "You don't owe me a relationship with her," Patricia said quickly, clearly not wanting to pressure Melissa into anything she wasn't genuinely ready for. "I understand completely if that's not something you're comfortable with." Melissa considered this carefully. "I think," she said slowly, "given everything you've shared with me, and given how much time you may have left, I think I might be willing to arrange a small visit, if you're feeling well enough. Nothing extensive. Just a chance for her to meet you, if that's something you'd like." Patricia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I would like that more than I know how to properly express," she said. 2 weeks later, Melissa brought Grace for a brief, carefully arranged visit with Patricia, having first explained to her daughter, in simple, honest terms appropriate for her age, that her grandmother was unwell and that they were going to visit her to share some kindness during a difficult time. "Is she still mean?" Grace asked, with the blunt directness children often bring to complicated situations. "I don't think so, sweetheart," Melissa said honestly. "I think she's learned some important things since then, about how she treated me. I think she'd like the chance to know you a little, if you're comfortable with that. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." Grace, ultimately curious, and like her mother, remarkably resilient and open-hearted despite the complicated family history, agreed readily to the visit. The meeting itself was brief but genuinely moving. Patricia greeting her granddaughter with careful, gentle warmth, delighted by Grace's easy curiosity and confident, kind nature. "You have your mother's spirit," Patricia told her, watching Grace politely but enthusiastically describe her favorite school subjects. "That's a wonderful thing to have." Patricia passed away peacefully several months later, surrounded by her family, Grant, Deborah, Harold, and, in her final days, Melissa and Grace as well, who visited one last time at Patricia's specific, gentle request. At the funeral, held the following week, Melissa attended alongside Marcus and Grace, standing quietly among the gathered mourners, feeling a complicated but genuinely peaceful sense of closure at having found her way, against every expectation, to some measure of real reconciliation before Patricia's passing. Grant approached her briefly during the reception following the service, his expression carrying visible gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving her that chance to make things right, even this late. I know you didn't owe her that. I think it meant more to her than she probably knew how to properly express. I did it as much for myself as for her. Honestly," Melissa said, "I think I needed that closure too, in my own way." In the years that followed, Melissa often reflected on the remarkable, unexpected journey her relationship with Patricia had ultimately taken. From the devastating cruelty of that terrible dinner, through years of complete estrangement, to a genuine, if limited, reconciliation before Patricia's death. "I think the lesson I want Grace to eventually understand," she told Marcus one evening, watching their daughter, now 7, practice her handwriting at the kitchen table, is that people are capable of genuine change, even very late, even after causing real harm. That doesn't mean you owe anyone unlimited chances, or that you should stay in relationships that are actively hurting you, but it does mean that healing, forgiveness, and genuine growth are always possible, for anyone willing to do the difficult, honest work required. "That's a beautiful, complicated lesson," Marcus said. "I think you've modeled it remarkably well, honestly, throughout this entire journey." "I hope so," Melissa said softly, watching her daughter's careful, determined concentration as she practiced her letters. "I hope she grows up understanding both halves of that lesson equally well, that she deserves to walk away from cruelty, and that genuine change, however late, is always worth honoring when it's real." Years later, when Grace herself was old enough to understand the fuller, more complicated shape of her family's history, Melissa told her the complete story, not just the pain of that devastating dinner, but the unlikely, hard-won reconciliation that had eventually followed. "I think what I learned from all of it," Melissa told her teenage daughter, the two of them sitting together on a quiet evening years after Patricia's passing, "is that people can hurt you terribly, and you can still find your way to peace, even if that peace looks different than you might have originally expected." I never got a formal apology at that terrible dinner. I never got Grant standing up for me in the moment it mattered most. But I built my own peace anyway, through my own choices, my own resilience, and eventually, through an unexpected, genuine reconciliation that came on my own terms, in my own time. Grace considered this thoughtfully, in the same serious, careful way she had approached difficult questions since she was very young. "I think that's the bravest part of the whole story," she said finally. "Not that you succeeded, even though that part is amazing too, that you stayed open enough to eventually forgive her, even after everything, without ever needing her forgiveness or her change to validate your own worth in the first place." Melissa pulled her daughter into a warm, proud embrace, feeling, in that quiet moment, the full weight and beauty of everything she had built, not despite the pain of that long-ago terrible night, but through the hard, deliberate choices that had ultimately carried her so far beyond it.